In this video, we learn how to set Arnold as our render engine, and we find out where are all the related Arnold for Cinema 4D or C4D2A options within Cinema 4D. First off, in order to set Arnold as your render engine, you need to go to your render setting, and here using this drop down, choose Arnold to be your render engine. Now, if you click on Arnold render, you can see all the render settings that Arnold provides. In the main tab resides the most important Arnold render settings, including sampling and ray depth that are used in order to control the quality of your render. Then you have environment tab. Here you can define atmospheric effects like atmosphere volume and fog. The background option is scheduled to be removed here as Arnold supports Cinema 4D's native background object. Motion blur tab is used to enable or disable motion blur and control the motion blur related options. We have our texture, color manager, subdivision, and advanced rollouts to control some additional options. The color manager is especially important as we discuss it later on. In the system tab under render settings, you will find options like rendering bucket size and bucket scanning method. Under device selection using render device, you can opt for CPU or GPU rendering. As I have a pretty beefy CPU and GPU rendering is a tad limited at the time being, I'll be using CPU rendering for most of this course, but we'll talk extensively about GPU rendering as well. Down here, you'll find options to control how IPR or interactive preview window works, and finally some search path and licensing settings. We have our AOVs tab. AOVs or arbitrary output variables is the term Arnold uses for multipass rendering. We'll learn everything you need to know about AOVs later on in the course. We have Arnold Denoiser tab where you can denoise your renders. It's not a real-time denoiser like NVIDIA's optics denoiser. This one is a post-process denoiser. So after your render is finished, you can use the provided UI here to denoise your render, and it works really great. Arnold does support optics for real-time denoising, and we'll learn about that later on as well. Then there's this diagnostics tab where you can generate a log reporting all the steps needed to render an image as well as any warnings and errors encountered by the renderer. Down here we have this feature override rollout. You can use these switches to enable or disable some of the rendering features. Also there's this text overlay section which can be a lifesaver honestly. If you enable it, you can define certain information about your scene like what camera you're using or the lens information or the sampling numbers to be shown as text overlay on top of your render. If you go to the extensions menu, you can find Arnold for Cinema 4D menu. You can create Arnold cameras, lights, Arnold sky, procedurals, volume, Arnold driver, Arnold TP groups to use with thinking particles, Arnold operators. You can start IPR and interactively preview your render. You can export the scene to Arnold scene source files and USD files. Your assets and textures can be managed using the Asset TX Manager option. There are a bunch of very useful utilities here to convert materials, bake objects and textures, and so on. And finally, you can find some help and licensing options as well. Let's take a look at the C4D2A tags. If I create a cube here, right click on the cube and go to C4D2A tags, you can see we have 6 tags. Arnold parameters tag, Arnold mesh light, Arnold mesh particles, Arnold mesh volume, Arnold object mask, and Arnold custom AOV. You are going to use Arnold parameters tag more often as it controls a lot of aspects of your objects and cameras. We'll be discussing this tag thoroughly later on. Now, if we go to the materials window, click on create, then extensions, here you can find Arnold Shader Network Editor, which allows you to connect nodes and shaders in order to develop shader networks. Let me close this window, and if you go back to the create menu again, you can find this Arnold section as well. And here you can create different shaders directly without having to open up Arnold Shader Network first. You can see different types of shaders like standard surface shaders, standard hair, and much more. We discussed the shaders as well. So in this lesson, we learned how to set Arnold as our render engine and where to find Arnold inside Cinema 4D. In the next lesson, we go through the overall workflow in working with C4D2A.